There's a phrase in hermeneutics, and the phrase is context is king. Now, hermeneutics is the studying of the interpretation of Scripture, and so is exegesis, and I don't know what the difference is, but it might be that exegesis is for one passage and hermeneutics is a general how you interpret Scripture. But the only reason why you need to know the term hermeneutics is because when you read a Bible verse and you don't understand it, or when somebody comes up to you and says, this verse doesn't make sense, it contradicts all the other verses. A very good example of that is in Ecclesiastes, when it says, in the English Bible it says, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. You have a hermeneutic challenge because people will come up to you and say, well, that's not true. That statement isn't true. And everything, the Old Testament was written to be universal, so every single statement in the Old Testament is absolutely true. As it sets in a sentence, or usually in a paragraph. For example, God's love endures forever. That's true. Or another example is that Moses parted the Red Sea by using his staff, or God parted it by using a blowing wind. Or the people went down to Meribah. Those are just true statements. But in Ecclesiastes, that statement isn't true. So people go, what's up with that? So that's where hermeneutics comes in. Hermeneutics is the art of interpreting Scripture, and so is exegesis. And there's a phrase in seminary where the professors teach that context is king. And what they mean by that is that when you're reading a Bible verse and you don't understand it, and I've done this, it really works. You read 5 verses above and 5 verses below that Bible verse. And if you still don't get it, you zoom out and you read more and you read around that Bible verse, and it usually works. Very true. There's another application of context is when you're doing a book study, I follow a I don't know, an acronym, or it's not really an acronym, but I follow a phrase that's who, what, where, why, when, how. 8 things. Who wrote it? Who did they write it to? Or who was the original audience? What did they say is simply reading the passage. Where did they say it? Why did they say it? Why did God inspire them to speak to the people in that way? Was it in response to something that happened just recently in history? Was there something going on in the time period? Was there a king oppressing the Israelites or oppressing the Christians in the early days? Who, what, where, when, why, how was it written? And only if you go back into the original language can you understand if there are any literary effects. Who, what, where, when, why, how. And then the last how is how do I apply it to me? And going through all those is kind of arduous, but it also works really well. But if you still can't figure it out, I found that before doing context is king and before doing the who, what, where, why, when, how book study, if I go back and I actually look at the original language and then I retranslate it, and I go back and I look at the definition of every single word in the passage, and I'll retranslate it, and I'll come up with different meanings, maybe 5 or 6 different attempts at organizing words in their alternative definitions, and I've come up with some extremely colorful ways to say the same Bible verse in something else completely different. And I've found that that's actually now that I've been through seminary, that is my number one thing that I do for hermeneutics and exegesis, to interpret Scripture correctly, I go back to the original language first. And then after that, I can apply the context and the who, what, where, when, why, how. And for example, in the Ecclesiastes, the word is not actually meaningless, it's vapor. And it means that a vapor is short to last on the earth. It quickly disappears, and so your life is over very quickly. And the contrast, to match with the context, is that the contrast is it says, generations come, generations go, but the earth remains forever. And so he's contrasting how quickly we come and we go on this earth, but the earth has been around for a long time, and this is going to continue to be here. We only get one pass through earth. The rains, they get many passes throughout the earth, but we just get one shot at life, and it's over very quickly. So fear God and keep his commandments. Another popular one is Psalm 23. The typical translation of Psalm 23 is, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," which never made sense to me. So eventually, after seminary, when I looked up the translation, and that's not really what it's saying. I think a better translation for Psalm 23 verse 1 would be, well, the Hebrew says, Yahweh Roy Lo Exar. Yahweh, and the Jews will say Adonai, but Yahweh is the name for God, the Hebrew name for God, like the highest name for God. But out of respect, the Jews say Adonai, which means Lord. Adonai Roy, Lord Shepherd. Lo means not. Exar means need. So it's God, shepherd, not need. And so the rest of the psalm describes being in a place of not needing anything. It doesn't necessarily talk about how to organize your wants. And once all your needs are fulfilled, do I want chocolate ice cream or strawberry ice cream? You want chocolate, by the way. All it's saying is that when you go back and you actually get the best sentence that you possibly can, then you take that sentence and you reinsert the new sentence that you've created from studying the language and going back to the translation. You take that and you reinsert it back into what you're trying to understand. And every time this has worked for me. And context is king. Usually works for me too every time. I can't remember a time where it doesn't. But it just seems faster to go back to the original translations. Happy Bible hunting. Oh yeah, it takes a lot of work. That's why not a lot of people do it. And that's why seminary professors get paid so much. Or sometimes so little, unfortunately. But that's why. And that's why pastors of very large congregations of 3,000 to 5,000 or more congregation attendees, regular attendees, they ask that their pastors have a master's in divinity, because you learn the Hebrew and the Greek, and at any time you can go back to the Hebrew and the Greek, and you're wading in comfortable waters, so to speak. You're very comfortable going back to the original language, and it circumvents a countless amount of mistranslations, and it helps you much more easily translate the main idea that the original passage intended.